Hello. Okay. You know, when you plan on doing something and then you realize what you planned on, you forgot. Oh, damn. Ah, all right. We'll see if we can do this in any case, but it would have been nice if I could have fixed that. Okay. Close all tabs. Okay, hold on here. Ba-ba-bum. I want let's see, history. We want, well, let's do it by date. What do we do? Oh, okay, open that up. Okay. Okay. Close that. Go back to this. All right. Let's see. What do I want here? No. Okay, let's see. Okay, let's try this again. Hold on here. Okay. That's one. All right, so what I intended to do this evening was print out, which I did, the material that I want to recite, that I want to read, my notes, so that I wouldn't have to keep getting confused between back and forth of the, I don't know, what was this? Oh, that was it. Between the what I have on the PowerPoint and notes, but of course I forgot. I printed everything out, and then I left it at the office. So now let me find it on here, and I'll just do it the regular way I've been doing it. Okay, today. Okay. All right. Um, let's see. I'm gonna move this to here. I'm gonna move this to here. And we're gonna open this up. All right, so let me just start. Almost there, almost there. Here we go. Um, okay, just clean everything up so I can easily move back and forth. Okay, I need those two things. Okay, I need the three things open. All right. So so I wanted to begin by apologizing. It's at 7:30. Yeah, okay. I want to begin by apologizing for last week's lesson. I didn't even send it out because it was so convoluted. I mean, I hope those of you who were with us got something from it because it was, I was just spewing out words, and I don't know how, if anything made sense. The problem is, and it's a good aphorism to learn in Hebrew, tafasta merubah lo tafasta. If you try to grab too much, you end up with grabbing nothing. So last week there was so much material that I was trying to cover, and I wanted to get so much in that I was lost in what I was actually saying. So this week, even though we are once again going to shoot for about another 1,000 years of history, I try to we're just going to focus on two things: dates of significant events, and then in each period, because I want to do the Talmudic period tonight and I want to do the Islamic period, I just really want to focus on a couple of core ideas. that occurred in these historical periods. Because every one of these periods, I mean, there's just so much. The last week we were doing biblical and the Hasmonean period and the early rabbinic period. The truth is that there aren't a lot of historical sources that we have to corroborate what was going on at the time, and certainly not in the biblical period. And we have various methods of trying to piece things together, but we don't have a lot of documents of texts, religious texts, but not historical texts. So I was trying to pull out all of these different threads, and really we could have sufficed in a much shorter class. This week, a lot more information. In fact, we could do a whole class on any one of these periods. 8-week, 10-week course on any one of these periods. But we're going to just try and go through again, as I said, the key ideas or changes in Jewish history, in the development of Judaism that came out of these periods. So we're going to start with the Talmudic period tonight, and we kind of touched on this a little bit last time, in that we mentioned 4 groups. Last time we met, we talked about during the early part of the millennium. Oh, and that's another thing, I don't think I mentioned it last week. When we talk about time periods, Jews don't use BC and AD because they both refer to, and the whole point of the switch in the millennia are around Jesus. So, BC is before Christ and AD is Anno Domini, which is the year of our Lord. When you hear people talk about how, today, this is the year 5784 in the Jewish calendar. Well, that's a different type of calculation called Anno Mundi, which means the year of the world. And it's based on the, how should we call it? The tradition, the fable that the world is 5,000 years old. And that's because we're basing it on the Bible. And it's basically a book, an early rabbinic text called Seder HaOlam, which goes back, and it's not so hard to count. If you start in the Bible, the early text, the book of Genesis in the Bible gives you, Adam 0. How old is Adam? Well, he was 900 some years old, but when he was, how old was he? Certain 100 years old, he gave birth to Seth. Seth was a certain number of years old, and so you count in those terms, and then you get to a little bit to the end of the biblical period, and then at that point you can kind of figure out what follows, because the later numbers are a little bit historical. We know that the first temple was destroyed in 586 of the Common Era. Before the Common Era. So anyway. But what we use today is usually an academic sense of before the Common Era, which of course it's common because of the influence of Christianity, and CE Common Era. Okay, so that's a little bit on the years. Okay, so in the before the Common Era, I'm sorry, we're past that. In the Common Era, year 70. Temples destroyed, second time by the Romans. This time it's a much more massive destruction because the building itself is much more massive. Herod, and we'll get to Herod in a moment, Herod, who was the king of Judea at the time, put into place by the Romans, he had created this tremendous edifice. He was a big builder. A lot of the things that he built during his reign in Israel still around. And so he built this magnificent edifice, and then it was all destroyed by the Romans when the Jewish revolt. So for this period, though, before we get to a little details of events. What was key about this period, this Talmudic period, and what were the changes in Jewish history, or that changed, modified that Judaism? So first of all, we talked about the collapse of the priesthood. The priests were very significant because the temple was the center, and so therefore, and that was where Jews came for to be together. You came for pilgrimages. It is how Jews atoned for the wrongs they did. And it was the place where you sensed the divine. This was where God resided or would meet the Jewish people. And temples destroyed. Oh my God, what do you do? Well, if you remember last week, we looked at there were four groups, according to the one of the few Jewish historians. Well, I guess actually the only Jewish historian at the time, Flavius Josephus, who was a Jewish general in the revolt against Rome in the 66 to 70 of the Common Era, but he saw the way he saw that the Jews weren't going to win, and he switched sides. So he joined the Romans, and while it was an act of betrayal, it was a Benedict Arnold a move. We're actually kind of long term, we're grateful because he wrote a number of significant histories of the period. Otherwise, we have no document, at least from Jewish sources, of what was going on. So he talks about four groups, and he's not the only one who mentions these four groups, but he writes extensively about them, or more so than other groups, other writers. There were the Sadducees, Pharisees, Zealots, and the Essenes. The Sadducees were very much tied in with the temple. They were made up, mostly it was the priestly class, but some other well-to-do who were, and they were conservative in the sense that they didn't want change. They didn't want the ways of Judaism to change. They liked the way it was. Every group has a conservative element to it, doesn't want things to change. And so they wanted, the focus being on the temple, and the people come into do their pilgrimage, make their offerings, and that was the focus of the Sadducees. There was another group, which is some people believe today was a break off of the Sadducees, called the Essenes. They're also identified with the Dead Sea Scroll sect because we're told by Josephus that they lived in the area of the Dead Sea, which is around the area where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, in caves of Qumran. And so so it's possible that the Essenes who Josephus writes about, and the people who collected the Dead Sea Scrolls, wrote some of the Dead Sea Scrolls, were the same group. It's possible they're the same group. Many modern scholars believe that they were a break off from the Sadducees. But they disagreed with the legal and the ritual reasonings of the Sadducees. And so they broke off and they went off to live in isolation. They were very much opposed to the way the things were being run in the temple, and they were looking for the day the Messiah would come, and they would confirm their understanding. That was the Essenes. Then there were the Zealots, who were militants, very much against the Romans. They agitated. They were the ones pushing for the war. And then there were the Pharisees. The Pharisees were the morph into the rabbinic class. The Pharisees, so the destruction of the temple leads to the collapse of the priesthood and the central focus of the temple. There's no temple anymore. The Pharisees, even before the temple was destroyed, had been developing a different emphasis on what Judaism is about. They focused on a number of things. They focused on mitzvot, that all the commandments that Jews were commanded in the Torah and the covenant, that was the focus. That was the most important, or they didn't disavow what happened in the temple. They just said there were other elements of Judaism that had to be emphasized as well, and one of them was observance of mitzvot. They aren't Not all the mitzvot are related to the temple and the religious practice there. They focused on Torah study and interpretation of Torah. They focused on Shabbat and holidays. Shabbat was essential to the Pharisees and to the rabbinic class. And finally, I would say the other area was prayer. Synagogues become prominent. Now, there are already synagogues at the same time as the temple, second temple is standing. Obviously, prayer is a kind of a natural desire for people. And if you can't get down, if you live in the Galilee, or you live farther south, or you live along the coast, the Mediterranean coast, you can't always get to Jerusalem on a regular basis to worship. Well, what if you want to gather with fellow Jews and worship and pray, as well as gathering for other reasons, celebrations and the like? So synagogues were developing at this time, and archaeology has unearthed a number of synagogues throughout Israel, as well as in other places in Asia Minor and the like, from this ancient time. So the people are already gathering. Well, once the temple falls, now the synagogue becomes the place to gather and to pray together. So those are some of the major changes, but we'll look at how important Torah study is in a moment, because we're going to see how that really the texts that are developed during this period, the Talmudic period, are originate with the rabbinic class approach to Judaism. Who are some of the more important? Oh, I know. I had my my PowerPoint all ready to go, and I forgot to start it up. Okay, so this is why I wanted the printed sheets. Okay, but we will make do. I will make do. All right, here we go. You should be able to see this screen. Okay, so to begin with, we've got this Jewish history timeline. All right. We'll back up a little bit. So in the BCE era, we ended last time we were talking about the Hasmoneans and how tragically the Maccabees, the descendants of the Maccabees, the Hasmonean family, who were so heroic. I mean, they were the heroes of the Hanukkah story. By the time they get to their great grandkids, the great grandkids are just as much despots as the Seleucids were, and they simply fall upon themselves. Well, they get into a war with outside wars, and eventually to maintain their independence, they bring in the Romans, who are a power in the area, in a growing power in the Mediterranean. They bring Pompey in to assist them in fighting their various enemies to maintain their independence. And as the way it goes in the world, if you're a bigger despot than the little despot, once you help them out, you realize, what am I helping them for? I'll just take the whole thing. So Pompey conquers the land of Israel in 63. Pretty much ends Jewish independence. Although there still are Hasmoneans, and now they are vassals of Rome. And it's and again, Josephus writes all about this, and he tells us that the descendants of the Hasmoneans were quite transactional in terms of whoever could pay the most and whoever give the Romans whatever they wanted, they would buy their way into the leadership, whether it was high priest in the temple, or which would also mean the head of the political head of the Jewish state. I think I mentioned last week that the only time in Jewish history when Jews have gone on campaigns to forcibly convert their neighbors was under one of these Hasmonean kings, and one of the areas where they forcibly converted people to Judaism was in a land Idumea, which I suppose was, I mean, it was a bordering area, um, probably originally the land of Edom, which is the descendants of Esau. Um, in any case, one of the descendants of the Idumean leaders who are now forced to be Jews is Herod. And Herod was a very clever um, political operator, and he works his way up the system, eventually marries into the Hasmonean family. He marries one of the daughters, the Hasmonean daughters, um, and then wipes everybody out. I mean, telling you, this is Game of Thrones, Shogun. I mean, it's the same story, just different colors, I guess. Um, but he wipes everybody out, and he is the reigning ruler, including some of the people he wiped out were his own kids, so that he wouldn't have any threats to his rule. He becomes very good friends. I mean, he is a knows how to work with the Romans, and you can see here he rules from 37 to 4 BCE. Um, After 4 BCE, there's a period of turmoil in the land of Israel. Some of his descendants do try to rule. Eventually, one of his grandchildren, Herodus, oh, Agrippa, Herod Agrippa, becomes one of the rulers of the land of Israel, and he's actually one of the few who the rabbis write about favorably. In any case, there's a lot of turmoil, and eventually, in the year 66, the Jews revolt. They rebel. They rebel in the under Vespasian is the ruler at the time. But this sets up an important element. There we go. Here, let's see. Yeah. Oh, here's the destruction of the temple. We talked about that. Okay. Rebellion. Now enters a period of rebellion. Jews are rebelling constantly. The 66 to 70, these four groups, and especially the Zealots, become very prominent in leading the rebellion. Um, Many Jews see this as ridiculous, no-win situation, and they want nothing to do with it. One of those is Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. The title Rabban means that he was the lead rabbi of the community. He was the leading rabbi of the day, and Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai is related to one of the Zealot leaders. He's in Jerusalem. He wants out because he sees this as no win. And so the very famous story that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai convinces his nephew, let me leave, which there was a siege. There was a siege of Jerusalem, so you couldn't just walk out. So his nephew was willing to let him go. Otherwise, the Zealots weren't letting anybody out. So we go through these histories. You're going to see, what's the famous line? I forgot who said it, but history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. So here in this case, it's a little bit like, what we're seeing today with Hamas. Hamas doesn't want any of their people to leave either. Because that's, when you're a zealot, when you're fighting this war, if your people leave, they run away, you lose your leverage, and people won't fight. You're not getting out unless you're fighting. So you've got to fight your way to freedom. The zealots didn't let anybody out of Jerusalem. His nephew, though, says, "Okay, I'll let you go. How are you going to get out?" So the story goes is that they put him in a coffin. You're not allowed to be buried in the city of Jerusalem to this day. And the coffin was taken out. They put him in a coffin and they lead him out. And depending on what version of the story you read, the Romans didn't believe. They stuck swords in the casket. Miraculously, he survives. When he gets out, he goes to Vespasian, who's the leading general, and again, this is according to the story, he addresses Vespasian as my emperor. Vespasian thinks he's making fun of him and he's about to kill him. Right at that moment, perfect timing, Vespasian gets a call. He's being called back to Rome to take over because I think it was Nero or Caligula, I can't remember which is the previous emperor, was killed. So he goes back. Oh my goodness, you predicted this fate for me, that you rabbi. What do you want? I'll give you anything. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, according to the story, says, "Give me Yavna." Yavna is a little city not too far from where Tel Aviv is today. And what he wanted was a place to start a new Jewish academy where he could teach disciples, because he was afraid that the Jews were going to be wiped out in this war. And so therefore he needed a place to continue Judaism. Well, he's a Pharisee, he's a rabbi, he's in the rabbinic class, and that's exactly what he does. And from Yavna, the Jewish community continues and grows, teaching the teachings of the rabbinic class. Now, one other thing that we should mention here too is that, and then the picture here that you're looking at is Masada. So if any of you have been ever to Israel, everybody always takes you to Masada. You can see Masada was originally Herod's winter palace. And you can see from the picture, I think it's big enough here. You can see from the picture that it's this area of dwelling right on top of a mountain. You can see the sides of the mountain here, which actually was very good to protect yourself, because it's very hard to get up. You have to climb up the mountain to get there. And so you can't really be surprised by an enemy army. And Masada, a group of zealots, after Jerusalem falls, a group of zealots take control of this area, and because it's been abandoned by Herod, I mean, nobody's living there. It's abandoned by Herod, and they take control of this area. And for 3 years, the temple is destroyed in 70 of the Common Era. 3 years they hold out, but eventually they're killed. The reason why it's famous is because, and again, this is a story told by Josephus, they commit martyrdom. Everybody, I forget exactly how many were left, but the dozens and dozens of people who were left all commit martyrdom. They, the men kill their families. The men then draw straws who's going to kill each other, until they all kill each other. And this becomes a very powerful image for future Jewish generations. We'll see it happen in Europe among many. But it also became a very powerful image for the modern state of Israel, basically that we're not doing, if we go down, we're going down like this. We're going to go down fighting. We are not going to, the imagery of the Holocaust of going to like lambs to slaughter, which is a little bit unfair, but that was in the mindset of so many Jews during the Zionist, the growth of the Zionist movement, that we Jews go down too easily, and that Masada became for them the touchstone. So that's Masada, and that's the war against the Romans, the Jewish revolt, the Great Jewish Revolt against the Romans. But that it doesn't stop there. There are Jewish diasporas developing during this period. Um, and the Jewish diaspora follows Roman expansion. Wherever Rome goes, Jews often follow. Maybe they're working, they're part of the Roman um, uh, hosts who are taking these territories. But the Jews, sometimes the Jews are warriors themselves. But the Jews kind of follow um, the Roman expansion. So the Jewish diaspora does grow. Um, and you've got communities all along. You can see here North Africa, and here's Libya. Cyrenaica is Libya. Jews in Egypt, Alexandria. That's where Philo, we mentioned Philo last week, that's where Philo is from. And in the year 115 to 117, there are revolts by many of these Jewish communities that have become, I guess, comfortable living in these areas. And it's usually wars between the Jews and the Greek citizens. Now, this is Roman territory, but there are Greek citizens, Hellenists, living in these areas as well. And the Jews and these Greek, the Hellenists get into clashes, and the Romans put down the rebellion of the Jews. So that's what all these little fires are. And many of these communities are wiped out. Alexandria, that's why we don't know of Philo, except for because of the Christian church, because during this period of time, Philo's living the same time as the rabbinic period of first century of the Common Era, but for the medieval period, nobody knew who he was because the entire Alexandrian community was wiped out. Um, that was 115 to 117. And then, okay, so 70, you have this major revolt, temple's destroyed. But what's interesting is unlike the first destruction of the temple, when the Babylonians exiled all the Jews, or many of the Jews, certainly all the leadership, Jews continue to live in the land of Israel. Even though the temple's been destroyed, they move up towards the north for the most part, in the Galilee. But there's still the center of the Jewish world is still in the land of Israel. And they continue to, I guess there's good times and bad times even after the destruction of the temple. But by 132, 60 years later, the Jews are frustrated, or their frustrations, I should say, have boiled over. And this time they coalesce behind a military leader known as Bar Kokhba. His name was probably Bar Koziva, but Kokhba is a star. So like the son of the star, a great name. He leads a rebellion, and here in this last picture, the rebellion was so successful that they even began to print coinage. You can see here, if you look, you should be able to see here, you can see they took coins of the realm, maybe Roman coins, and they simply stamped on top of the coins their own signia. And the print here is in Hebrew. It's not the normal Hebrew script that we use today. It was I forgot what they called it was well, it doesn't make a difference. It's an earlier Hebrew script. But it says on there, you can see the one side has a picture of the temple that reads Shimon, that's Shimon Bar Kokhba. He was the leader. And on this side over here, where you've got the lulav and in a vase, it says to the freedom of Jerusalem. So they had these coins printed the first year of liberation, second year of liberation. So it was very successful until it wasn't, when the Romans brought their full forces upon this rebellion, and the destruction is complete. In fact, this is where you get the name Palestine. If you want to know who the first Palestinians were, it was the Jews, because as a punishment for this rebellion, Hadrian, was the current ruler of the Roman ruler, he renames Judea Palestina, because it was one, as if it was the land of the Philistines, biblical enemies of the Jews. Jerusalem becomes a persona non grata for Jews. They're not allowed to live in the city. It's called, they rename it Aelia Capitolina. And for the next, again, period of time, 50 years or so, Jews are mostly moved up to the Galilee. But at the same time, Jewish life doesn't end in the land of Israel, and the rabbinic class is developing their studies and their program for Judaism. However, after this defeat, not 70, not the destruction of the temple, but after 135, the diaspora does begin to grow. So Jews are still living in the land of Israel. They're still the majority, but it's getting smaller and smaller. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. However, the rabbinic Jewish program is, as I said, developing. They have no really other groups that are competing with it. And so the Jewish life moves to the Galilee, northern Israel. The Sanhedrin, the Jewish court, is reconstituted. And so, but it does begin a process in the beginning of the 3rd century of the Common Era, where the center place of the Jewish people begins to shift towards Babylonia, where Jews have been for quite some time. They've been there since the destruction of the first temple, but the community there is growing. And this is the period we call the Talmudic period. It begins with the development of the Mishnah, which is a rabbinic text. It's our earliest rabbinic text. It's under the leadership of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, which means Judah the Prince or Judah the President. He was the head of the Yavna Academy at this time. During the 3rd century, or the very beginning of the 3rd century, he completes this text known as the Mishnah. What's the Mishnah? We talked about it earlier before, but briefly, it is kind of like a guide to rabbinic Judaism. There are 6 sections that it's made up of areas of Jewish law, and the areas are agricultural law, holiday law, laws regarding men and women relationships, torts and civil dispute laws about civil courts, and then the last 2, and this is telling, are about purity and impurity rules and rituals in the temple. And I say it's telling because still at this point in the year 220, there's no temple. The temple's not been rebuilt. The first temple was rebuilt within 70 years because the Persians allowed the Jews to do that. Jews are not able to do that, but yet they're thinking about it. And they're getting these rules down on paper, as it were, to make sure you have the text. Now, once you have this 6-volume text broken up into many other sections and chapters, and this is true for every law code, and it is made up of, it's not exactly a law code, but there's a lot of laws in it and discussions of laws. Once you have that, people start to ask questions. And of course, over a couple hundred years, times change. Jews aren't as much involved in agriculture as they used to be. They're living in cities. They're urban now. They're living outside the land of Israel. So once you have this written text, this compiled text known as the Mishnah, you start asking questions, and the students in the academy, this becomes their major text, and they study that text and they ask questions. Well, what about in this case? And what in this case? And that's what the Talmud is. Now you can see the Jerusalem Talmud is completed in the year 390 CE, whereas didn't make this clear. The Babylonian Talmud, that's the age of the Amoraim. I should have made it clear. Babylonian Talmud, that's the 3rd through the 5th century. The Babylonian Talmud isn't closed until 500, and that's partially a process of Jewish life. Jewish life in the land of Israel is becoming more and more destitute. You can see here one of the things in general history is Constantine becomes emperor of Roman Byzantine Empire. Constantine is a Christian. Now, he's not born as a Christian, but he becomes Christian. And he makes Christianity the religion or the official religion of the Byzantine Empire. And he comes down very hard on the Jews, on Jews who are, of course, as we just saw, living throughout this Byzantine empire. Byzantine Empire is, the former Roman Empire, although it's been concentrated into the area that we would call Turkey today, right? Constantinople is Istanbul was once referred to as Constantinople. So the Jerusalem Talmud is completed earlier because the community is dissipating, whereas the Babylonian community is thriving at this time under Persian, Zoroastrian, and Persian rule, and so they're able to last until the beginning of the 6th century when their Talmudic text is fixed. Also, but there's still Jews, I should say, there's still Jews in the land of Israel because the homiletic midrashim, that is, we talked about midrashim. Midrashim is a way of investigating the biblical text. And there are 2 types. There's homiletic, or what we would call agadic. Agada is a story. Arab Joshua Heschel referred to it as theological midrashim. And then you have halachic midrashim, where you investigate the text to pull out the meaning of halakha. And but these homiletic midrashim with stories, theology, they're being written in the land of Israel even in the 5th century. So there's still Jews there, but the Jewish community is getting smaller and they're being persecuted. It's better for Jews in Babylonia and in other parts of the diaspora. And then finally here, we're going to end with the Gaonic period. The Gaonic period is, a Gaon is a scholar. And it was a title given to the leaders in Babylonia. Should have mentioned one other thing. I thought I had it in here. There were political leaders and religious leaders during this period. We talked a little about the religious leaders. The political leaders, in Israel, it was known as the patriarch, and in Babylonia, it was known as the exilarch. And they were the political leaders. They were connected to the rulers, the Gentile rulers. Exilarch in Babylonia was actually, I believe, part of the Persian ruler's court. So he was the mediator between the Jewish community and the Persian leader. And the patriarch was the leader for the Jewish community in the land of Israel. But that is ended. Let's see what I've got here. I don't have the exact date, but that ends around the 3rd, 4th. I guess it was around the 4th century. The patriarch ends. Oh, I should have said one other thing. Who gets to choose? Who becomes the exilarch or the patriarch? They are supposed to be descended from the line of David, of King David. Again, there was this notion that, we're coming back. One day we're coming back and we're going to set up the Jewish state once again, and King David, and a descendant of King David will take the throne. So this was, now of course it was becoming less and less likely, but that was still part of the thinking in choosing leadership. So here we have the Gaonic period, but the Gaonic period, the Gaonim were the scholars who ran the academies, the learning academies in Babylonia. Oh, here's we saw this once before. I showed you this. Here are the religious texts that were developed under the rabbinic class. So first you see the Tanaim, the period of the Mishnah. You have Midrash, but it's halachic, it's legal Midrash. You have a text known as the Mishnah, we were just talking about that. A text known as the Tosefta, which comes from the same period. It was just extraneous material. Should have mentioned, the Mishnah is made up of oral teachings. That's what we usually call the oral law. It's made up of, it was oral teachings by different rabbis in their interpretation of Jewish law. What Rabbi Judah Hanatzi did was put it down on paper. He fixes it because, again, you saw that the diaspora is becoming too broad, too vast, and you couldn't just go easily and learn with a teacher. And so he wanted to make sure, in order not to lose this material, he coalesced all of these different oral teachings on these areas, and he puts it into a fixed form. Well, again, once you have a fixed form, then you got more questions. Tosefta is some of the same material, but didn't make it into the official Mishnah, but it was still considered valuable. Both of these materials end up in the Talmud Yerushalmi, which is a little bit of a misnomer. It was sometimes referred to as the Jerusalem Talmud, but it was actually created in the Galilee. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as the Palestinian Talmud, because that's the name of the country during this period. And today, more and more people are referring to it as the Talmud Eretz Yisraeli, the Talmud of the land of Israel. But the main Talmud, when you hear the word Talmud, it's really the Bavli. It's the Babylonian Talmud, which was created in Babylonia, also made up of these materials. All of these materials end up in the Bavli. They're just different scholars sitting around, different interpretations, different conversations. And you also have Agadah, that's the homiletical material. You have Parshanuta Mikra, that's taking taking the biblical texts and just trying to explain them, not for gleaning any legal material out of them, just trying to make sense of the text as it is. And then here's the period, all the stuff in green is the period of the Amoraim, that's the Talmudic period. So this is the Mishnah period. This is the Talmud period, but it's all rabbinic. And then we'll get a little bit to we'll get to the brown part later on. Okay, we're talking about biblical Babylonian Talmudic academies. Here are the Babylonian cities. This is in Iraq, modern day Iraq. Tigris River, Euphrates River, and you can see that these were where the academies were. Now the main academies, the first academies I should say, were in Sura and Nehar Da'ah, but then Nehar Da'ah is destroyed, and so they moved to Pumbedita. There's also one in Mechoza. But these academies lasted hundreds of years. We think about Jewish community in this country, it's 200 years, and we're so excited that Jews have been in America, and we're so grateful. But in the back of every Jewish person's mind is the reality that Surah lasted 800 years. The Jews were living in Surah for 800 years, and they were thriving there much of this time. Pumbedita, same thing for hundreds of years. And then political winds shifted, and they were all destroyed. Jews started to move away, of course, and we'll get to exactly why in a moment. Here's a picture about, what do you call it, a model of what the academy was like. You see that it's based on rows. The top students are in the front row, and here are the ones who need a little extra help in the back row. And you would move your way up. The more, as you became more learned, you would move your way up to the front. But that's how it would be. There would be a teacher in the front, and the students would sit and listen, maybe ask questions. You can see here's the scholar, the teacher is sitting. Next to him is what's known as the Meturgaman, or the Tana. I'm sorry, not the Meturgaman. Meturgaman is a different job. Meturgaman is the person who was in the synagogue who, when they didn't have books, right? Today we've got English translations of the Torah when we read it. Meturgaman was the person who would translate. As the Torah reader was reading, the Meturgaman would shout out in the language, the usually Aramaic language of what the Torah reader was reading. This person is known as the Tana, similar to the word that I mentioned before about the Mishnah. The people who lived at the time of the Mishnah are known as the Tanaim. But this person also, his job was the Tana, and what he would do is, it was like ancient version of Google. The teacher would teach something. He's teaching a lesson on something. And let's say he wants to remember, well, what's the Mishnah on this text or on this area of law? And he would turn to the Tana and he would say, okay, so give me the Mishnah on this section. And the guy would spit it out. And that's what they did. So that's how they would know what their texts were, because obviously there were no books. Okay, now we're moving into the Islamic period. All right, so we ended there. 600, the Gaonate begins. But in year 622, Muhammad shows up, one of the great religious leaders of all time. Amazing. It's just, we talked about, what's his name, the Great? Alexander the Great. Young guy, 10 years, conquers the whole world. Well, Muhammad does it, I think he does it even one better. Although he doesn't live as long. Well, no, he also, Alexander died. Okay. Well, anyway, in 622, Muhammad enters Medina and he has this vision. And within 10 years, Islam has conquered the Middle East. In 638, Jerusalem is conquered by the Arabs, but we're talking about Muslim Arabs now. There were Arabs before Muhammad. Muhammad, though, brings them monotheism, and that's what the focus of Islam is. And he does in many ways he does for the pagan Arabs what Paul does for the pagan Gentiles in the Levant. Let's see. Wait, I gotta get my new notes here. Okay. All right. Now we're in these. Okay. Oh, so I should have said this. I should have a little introduction. So we did talk about Constantine. 324, Constantine, he's the emperor of Rome. He's the first Christian emperor. He makes Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. He moves his capital to Byzantium, which is, again, Constantinople, which is today Istanbul. And within 200 years, the land of Israel is majority Christian. So by the middle of the 6th century, Israel is no longer a majority Jewish land. It's now majority Christian. And the reason is because of pagan converts, talking about, Paul and his followers are very successful, and also Christian pilgrims who have come from other parts of the empire. Here it is, 430. So it's the 5th century, beginning of the 5th century, the patriarchate is extinguished. So there's no Jewish leadership, political leadership in the land of Israel anymore. And the focus is now shifted to Babylonia, or the leadership, the center of the Jewish world has shifted. 622, Muhammad brings Islam. And as I said, 634, 634 or 638, it's not so clear, but one of these, but in this period of time, the land of Israel is conquered by Muslims. Um, by 735, 100 less, less than 150 years later, Islam rules from southern Asia through the Mediterranean, all the way to India, Egypt, all of North Africa, much of Spain, and southern France. I mean, it's remarkable how quickly this religion develops. Now, for the Jews, some are very, very happy because they are suffering under Christian persecution. You can see here in 694, it's not the first time that the Spanish have outlawed Judaism. Spain, under the Visigoths, outlawed Judaism in 694. But that doesn't last too long because by 711, Spain and the Visigoths are conquered by the Arabs. And the Arabs at first, the Muslims, have a different approach to Judaism than the Christians for a number of obvious reasons. Christianity comes out of Judaism, right? Their savior was a Jew. So they have to wrestle with the question of who are the real Jews? Is it the original ones, the first Jews? Or no, it's us. But it's not so easy because there's still Jews living around. And it's like Coke and New Coke. New Coke was not, nobody appreciated New Coke because, so therefore, in this case, what do the followers of the New Coke do? They try to wipe out the followers of the old Coke. So Jews are persecuted by Christians. Muslims don't have that issue. There is a relationship between Muhammad and the Jewish community because supposedly the Jewish community in Arabia teach Muhammad many of the basics of Judaism. I mean, that's where they get the monotheism. But at some point, he turns on the Jews and wipes out the Jewish communities in Arabia. And, the Quran is very, very anti-Semitic. Or not, I shouldn't say very, very. It is anti-Semitic. Same way the New Testament is anti-Semitic. I mean, in the Quran, there are parts that aren't anti-Semitic. And the reason why is because they don't have this issue that Christianity has with Judaism. So for them, they appreciate the fact that at least the Jews are monotheists, unlike the pagans. So Jews and Christians are considered to be people of the book. They have books which preach monotheism. And so that spares Jews much of the suffering that Christians have imposed on them. On the other, also, Jews and Christians are at the same level. They're technically second-class citizens. So there's a lot of rules that Jews and Christians have to live by if you're living in a Muslim-controlled area. Just things like sometimes you couldn't walk at the same level as a Muslim. So a Muslim was walking on a pavement, you'd have to walk in the street. Your places of worship had to be shorter. They couldn't be bigger than the mosque and things like that. So they're mostly insulting, but they're not necessarily as persecutory as living under the Christian empire. Another benefit to this period, though, for the development of Judaism, let's see, do I have a picture here? Oh, I don't know if I did that. Oh, that's too bad. Okay, well, but I did mention to you where the extent of Islam. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's like much of the known world, much of this world at this time is under the Islamic Empire. That means most Jews are living under the Islamic Empire. And that becomes very powerful in the development of Judaism because you don't have Jews living under different authorities. They're all under the caliphate. And Jews, as we have always done, assimilate very nicely, not so much the religion, but culturally, Jews start speaking Arabic. And they're able to do business with one another, and they're able to share their texts, their sacred texts easily with one another, because you have this huge empire, a border around the huge empire. Um, uh, Yuval Ben Harari, who wrote the book *Sapiens*, if you've ever read that book, it's a very interesting book. Um, and one of the points he makes, because many of his points are contrarian, one of the points he makes is that empires aren't all bad, that empires allow for positive development of things. And one of them for Jews in this case is all the Jews are speaking Arabic. They do by I forget what general. At some point during this period, Hebrew stops being a spoken language. Sacred text, everybody knows Hebrew, you're reading it, but it's either Greek if you're living in under the empire of the Byzantine Empire, or it's Arabic. But since most Jews are now living under the Arabic rule, it makes it a lot easier for Jews to converse with one another. Um, Also, another important factor of this empire, the Arabic and the Muslim empire, their capitals shift. Because, of course, like any other empire, there are tensions. And so, wherever the Islamic center is, that was where the Jewish world center was. Um, and there's a gradual shift from Babylonia to Spain, when Spain becomes the center of the Muslim world. Um, Another important factor, the Muslims are great learners, they're great intellectuals. And so every uh, place where they conquer, again, this is very much like what happens under Alexander and Hellenism. Wherever the Muslims conquer, they imbibe the intellectual texts of that culture. Well, Jews are speaking Arabic. They are reading and so the Arabs translate, or the Muslims translate these intellectual texts, and many of them are Greek philosophy that's kind of been de-emphasized for centuries. They begin to translate these into Arabic. Well, Jews read Arabic, so now Jews are reading Greek philosophy. And just as Arab thinkers are trying to put together and synthesize a Muslim theology with this very attractive Greek thought, very rational Greek thought, either Platonic or Aristotelian, Jews are doing the same thing. Jewish thinkers are trying to make sense of how this Greek stuff, it makes a lot of sense, but it goes against our tradition, so we got to somehow synthesize these ideas. One of these things here, you're looking at the timeline here, we'll skip this one, but in Saadia Gaon in the 9th and 10th century, living in Babylonia, one of the leaders of the academy, Saadia Gaon is a fascinating character. I think I actually have some material on him in a moment. He he does a number of things that promote the development of Jewish thought. First of all, he translates the Bible into Arabic, which I understand to this day, I don't even know if there are any Yemenite Jews left. Whoever has been left, I think they've been brought to Israel. In the 50s, there was a huge airlift of Yemenite Jews to Israel. So, but I don't think there are any left in Yemen today. I certainly hope not. But in any case, but even in the modern world, the Yemenite Jews see Saadia Gaon's Arabic translation as like their standard translation of the Bible. So he does that, and which allows, again, Jews who are not scholars to be able to read their holy text. He is a tremendous grammarian. He goes back. It's very interesting. Again, what are the cultural influences? Muslims are really focused on grammar and literature because my understanding is in Islam, the Quran is like the most perfect language in Arabic and literary text. So they really study the literature and the grammar of their holy book. Well, Jews have to counter that because they have to be able to have conversations with their Arab colleagues or their other scholars who are Arabic who insist that they're right, and the Jews are saying, well, we've got this sacred text. So they become very focused on grammar. And Saadia Gaon is one of these people who becomes a very significant grammarian. There's another reason, which is that there's another Jewish movement that develops during this time. It's known as the Karaite movement. The Karaites rebelled against the Rabbinites. And the way that their rebellion is that kara in Hebrew means a text. They became very focused on the text, and they became literalists and scholars of Hebrew language. They rebelled against rabbinic interpretation, which, like after a while, wait, who says that that the rabbis have the right interpretation of Jewish texts? We got our own interpretation. So that was the Karaite movement. They were a different group of Jews who insisted that their interpretation of the Torah was the correct one, and it was a much more literal interpretation. So just as an example, it says you shall not light a fire. Right? The Torah tells us you're not allowed to light a fire on Shabbat. Well, rabbinic interpretation allowed for you to start a fire, and still what we follow today. You can start a fire before Shabbat and keep it going, and so you can have warm food on Shabbat. Karaites said, nope, no fire on Shabbat. You eat cold food on Shabbat. So that's just one example of how they took things. That was their a literal approach. But the Karaites also focused very much, just as their Arab Muslim neighbors, focused on grammar and Hebrew language and the roots of words. So Rabbinite Jews, they got to keep up, and Saadia Gaon was one of those who did. And Saadia Gaon also is the first, I don't know, or maybe it's not fair to call him the first, but he's one of the earliest Jewish philosophers. Why is he a philosopher? Because a philosopher is a person who takes different thought, synthesizes different ways of thinking about the world, and in this case, theology, thinking about God. So he is an early synthesizer, and his book, the Book of Beliefs and Opinions, is one of the earliest, if not the first, Jewish philosophical theological text. Okay, so that's Saadia Gaon. And then we have Aharon ben Asher, lives in Israel. So Jews are still living in Israel. He lives in Tiberias. And he and his group of scholars living there, they're the ones who finally, look at this, this is the year 900. They are the ones who established the authoritative text of the Hebrew Bible. That means all these hundreds of years, you don't really have an authoritative text. We talk about, well, Moses brought the Torah. Moses, well, you know what? We saw that even as late as the first century before the Common Era, and even in the first century of the Common Era, with the Essenes, the isolationists who are living in the Dead Sea area, we know now, because we have these texts, there are differences in the Essenes version of some biblical books than what we have today, which means that even during the period when the Essenes were around, again, 2,000 years ago, there wasn't an agreed upon biblical text. Now, mostly it's the same, but there were still slight differences. So becomes a really important thing that Aharon ben Asher and his scholars do by fixing an authoritative text of the Hebrew Bible. So today, you open up any biblical text, any scroll, and you go to any synagogue in the world, you open up the scroll, every word's going to be the same in that scroll. And this comes from this period of time, living in the Islamic world in the Galilee. Next person we have here is Chasdai ibn Shaprut, becomes a courtier to the Muslim ruler in Spain, and this begins the development of the Sephardim. Sephardim, again, Jews who lived in Spain. You can see here, now, even before this, Jews are living in Spain, but Jews in Spain, as the center of the Islamic world is focused in Spain, the Jewish culture grows in this world. And Chasdai ibn Shaprut is a very important person in helping develop culturally. He's an important person in the Muslim rulers' what's the word I'm looking for? His cabinet, his court, and he and he promotes Jewish learning in that role because he's got money government money that he can spend. He promotes Jewish culture, Jewish poetry, which poetry was very important in the Muslim world, in the Arabic world, and Jews, again speaking Arabic, copy it. They write poetry in Arabic, but they also take the meters and I don't know enough about the poetry, the different types of poetry that are developing in the Muslim world at this time. But Jews are taking those ideas and then putting them into Hebrew, as well as writing in Arabic. Okay, oh, whoops, I didn't want to go too quick. Okay, end of the Khazar kingdom. Oh, so this is, the Arabs got Islam, Europe got Christianity, we Jews got the Khazars. The Khazars were a little kingdom in Central Asia, and their king, and it became very important in the Jewish world, Jewish pride, that their kingdom converted to Judaism from paganism, I guess. Anyway, so they lasted for, I'm trying to remember when they started. I think it was maybe in the 500s or 600s, I can't remember. But anyway, by this point, they're done because ours are gone. Year 1000, death of Hai Gaon. He's the last of the important Gaonim. Of course, Hai Gaon, as the Gaonim live in Babylonia, the shift has become complete. Babylonia is no longer the religious influence in the Jewish world. It is now shifted to Spain. And that was significant too, because what did that mean that they shifted, right? Again, we're not living in a world where you can Twitter something. But if you had a question, so the Talmud's closed, right? Well, but that doesn't stop questions. You still want to know what to do. You can't go to the Talmud and say, what time should I light candles on Friday night? It doesn't work that way. The Talmud is this vast corpus of law and discussion and stories and biblical interpretation, and it kind of just flows. So different Jewish communities and leaders and scholars start to put together, some put together codes of law. We'll get to that in a moment. But others, you would ask a question. So you would send a question to the Gaonim in Babylonia. You're living in Israel, you're living in Asia Minor, you'd send them a question, and with the question, you'd send money. Good, it's what you did. Um, so when the major leadership, the religious leadership, the scholars of the Jewish world, the more prominent scholars, are now in Spain, this is really tough for the Babylonians because they're losing not only influence in their scholarship, but they're also losing financial resources. It's shifting as well. Um, okay, so that's and that um, literature is called responsa. Let's see, where is it in here? She'elo. Oh, okay. That's down here in the brown. She'elot uchuvot. Questions and answers. Responsa. Okay, back to almost here we're in the 11th century. Here, the death of Shmuel Hanagid, mentioned him because he's a very interesting character. He's a military leader and a political leader in Granada, which is part of Spain that is, again, it's one of the Muslim controlled areas. I mean, and he's just what's the word, a jack of all trades. So he's a military leader for not for the Jews. He's a military leader for the Muslim, for the Granada. I don't know what nation, I guess. He's a scholar. He's a poet. He's a political leader. So anyway, he dies, and that you can see here another Muslim group takes Granada, and the community there is destroyed. So once Shmuel Hanagid dies, the community doesn't last much longer. And the Almoravids were a more fanatical Muslim group, and they conquer this part of Spain. It's a bad time for the Jews because the Crusaders take the land of Israel, and they are, of course, they've been slaughtering Jews all along the way in Europe, and they don't take, they have no relation. I want to say they're destructive to Jews in the land of Israel as well. So the small community in Israel at this time is also in danger by the Crusaders. Judah Halevi, we're going to get to in a minute. He's a Jew who lives in the 12th century. Let's see, our next time. Whoop. Moses Maimonides, we're going to get to him in a moment too. We'll say that in the year 1187, Saladin conquers Jerusalem from the Crusaders. And just have to pause here about Jews under Muslim rule. A lot of times you will hear people, especially Muslims or some scholars, who like to present that Jewish life under Islam was just peachy keen and it was wonderful, especially compared to what they had under the Christians. And while at times it was definitely better than under Christians, as I mentioned before, first of all, there's a limit to how good it can be ever if you're technically second-class citizen. That's your official title, is second-class citizen, so you can never be given complete equality. Secondly, it depends on who the Muslims are, just like it is with Christians. We'll see in Europe, if the Gentile ruler liked Jews, if they were open to diversity, if they were cultural types or intellectual types who like learning different things from different types of people, then it was great. It was fine for the Jews. Jews could become successful financially. They could become successful intellectually. They could ascend to high levels in the government, whether it was Christian or Muslim. But if the leaders were fanatics, if they were anti-intellectual, if they were fundamentalists, or if they needed a pressure release because they were getting threatened from their own people, they needed somebody to blame, a scapegoat, then it was not good for Jews. And it was not good for Jews in whether they lived in the Muslim empire or the Christian empire. Um, the period of Saladin in the land of Israel and around Egypt, fortunately, was a good period of time for the Jews. And we'll get to Moses Maimonides in a minute. 13th century, again, not so good for the Jews in Spain, which has become Christian. The Christians have reconquered Spain by this point. And Moses Nachmanides was another scholar, also a Kabbalist. He leaves Christian Spain, moves to Palestine, moves to the land of Israel, and organizes the community there. So there is, again, Jewish community in the 13th century in Jerusalem. 1492, of course, we'll get to the Europe next time. Jews are moving, mass immigration of Jews to the Turkish Empire. Ottoman Empire at this time, Ottoman Empire rules Turkey and the Middle East. They're Muslim, of course, and Jews move there because it is a much more pleasant community to live under. Not all Muslim areas. North Africa is horrible, but wherever Turkey ruled, the Ottoman Empire is, it's more livable for the Jews. Here, Ottoman Turks conquer Palestine 1516, so Jews start to move back to the land of Israel. Some Jews live there. Jews are living in, by the end of that century, Jews are living in Sfat, and these are the Jews we refer to as Sfardim. See, Spain is Sfarad, and Jews, but there aren't Jews in Spain anymore, but now they're moving to the Middle East, the Levant, and in northern Israel. They're not living so much. Well, I think they are in Jerusalem, but the center of Jewish life is in Sfat, which is a golden age for the Kabbalah, the mystical Judaism. Shulchan Aruch is completed in the 1563. That is the great code of law that we continue to use. I mean, people still look, when you talk about the Jewish codes of law, we still go back to the Shulchan Aruch, which is from the 16th century, but it's just complete, and also one of the great stories, I think I mentioned this once before, one of the great stories in the history of Jewish humility. The leading rabbi in the Sephardic world, living in this Joseph Caro, living in Sfat. He's a mystic, but he's also a great halachic scholar, a legal scholar. He's putting together this new legal code. Moses Isserlis, who is the leading Jewish scholar in Poland, that is the Ashkenazic Jews, European Jews, he's writing a new legal code for the Jews of Ashkenazic Jews. He finds out that the great Joseph Caro is putting his own Jewish code together, and he says, what am I going to double up work? What I'll do is I'll take Rabbi Cairo's text and I'll just add anywhere where we Ashkenazic Jews observe differently. We have a different custom or a different practice. And that is why the Shulchan Aruch becomes the major Jewish code of law, because it has both the authority, the Ashkenazic authority and the Sephardic authority in the same text. But as we'll get to a moment to Moses Maimonides, which is too bad, because Moses Maimonides' code of law, again, much earlier, 400 years earlier, is much easier to read. If you can read Hebrew, modern Hebrew, you can read Moses Maimonides. The Shulchan Aruch is a little technical and doesn't flow as well. So, but it's because of these two great scholars who combined. Then we have 1665, Shabtai Tzvi, the most, what do I want to say? The most followed Jewish false messiah in history. even greater than Jesus. Um, it's just that Jesus had a better program after he died. Shabtai Tzvi is a mystic. He declares himself Messiah. Jews from all over the world, even Christians, are thinking, wow, maybe this guy is it. He declares himself, he goes to the land of Israel. He's Turkish. He's living in Turkey. He goes, wait, did I get that right? No, he's living in the land of Israel. He goes to Turkey to tell the uh, head of the Ottoman Empire that he is the Messiah. And the head of the Ottoman Empire is not all that impressed. He basically says, "Oh, that's interesting. Well, you can either keep your life, you can either keep your head and become a Muslim, or you can be the Messiah without a head." And he chooses, Shabtai Tzvi is he's a mystic, but he's more practical than people gave him credit for. He chooses to become a Muslim, throws the whole Kabbalistic world and the followers into total disarray. It's another shock to the Jewish system. Um, there are people who continue to follow him in their own way to make sense of it. There are others who are totally demoralized. Um, but that's the Shabtai Tzvi. And then I just throw in here Benedict Spinoza, um, living at the same period of time. He's living though in Amsterdam, again, a Sephardi Jew. Family came from Portugal, moved to Holland. Many Sephardic Jews, Spanish Jews, moved to Holland to free themselves from the Inquisition. Um, and he, of course, is the famous, maybe the most famous modern, or the first modern person. Um, his thought is followed by many people, some Jews, but a lot of non-Jews, because he is really, he doesn't, his belief in God is not about God. He's basically a naturalist. God is the world. God is nature. And he he's kicked out of the Jewish community actually because of his heretical ideas. But really, with him begins the modern period for the Jewish world as well as the general world because of some of his ideas that he promotes, or people who follow him promote. All right, so that's a real quick review of historical timeline. I just want to finish with three people we mentioned today. Sadia ben Yosef Gaon. So as I said, he was a rabbi, he was a scholar, Jewish philosopher, exegete, that's a biblical commentator. He was active in the Abbasid Caliphate. That was the one in Babylonia, a little more friendly to Jews or open to Jewish, to diversity, I guess. He is the first important rabbinic figure to write extensively in Judeo-Arabic. He's known, as I said, Hebrew linguistics, halakha, Jewish philosophy, philosophical school known as Jewish Kalam, which brought together, again, Greek thought as well as Jewish traditional beliefs. And his book is the Books of Belief and Opinions. Here's Yehuda Halevi. We saw him. He was Yehuda Halevi is another fascinating figure. Lives in Spain, a poet. And I just wanted to, I've got two poems here. No, just the one poem. No, I think I have two poems here. Two poems here from Yehuda Halevi, because it shows you the extent of cultural development in the Jewish world. They are writing, wait a minute, I think I did this backwards. No. Yeah. Here we go. Missed a peg. Yehuda Halevi, okay, he's a Sephardic Jewish poet, physician, philosopher, born in Al-Andalus, which is Spain, and he was thought to have died in 1141 in either Jerusalem or Alexandria, Egypt. But here's one of his poems. And look at this. This is just a secular poem. Awake, my fair, my love, awake, so that I may gaze upon you. And if one is eager to kiss your lips, in your dreams this do you see. Lo, then I myself of your dream the interpreter will be. Okay, that's a beautiful love poem. And then he's also writing religious poetry. My heart is in the east, and I in the uttermost west. How can I savor this life, even taste what I eat? How shall I render my vows and bonds while yet Zion lies beneath the fetter of Edom? That's Christian, right? That's because the Crusaders rule Israel, and I in Arab chains, because he's living in Spain. A light thing would it be to me to leave all the good things of Spain, seeing how precious in my eyes to behold the dust of the desolate sanctuary. Story of Yehuda Levi is that he has kind of a religious awakening in his later years and decides to go to the land of Israel, where, as we said, we don't really know where he died. He did die on the journey. The romantic story is that he finally makes it to the coast of Israel, and as he bends down to kiss the earth, that he's finally touched the land of Israel, a Crusader knight or an Arab knight, whatever, attacks him and kills him right there. Very romantic. But he um, as you can see in this poem, he wants badly to move back to the land of Israel, and he moves there. I mean, he travels there. We don't know if he ever made it. Oh, and the other thing that he wrote this very, very famous philosophical work known as the Kuzari, back to that story about the Khazars, the Jews who converted to to Judaism. I mean, the pagans who converted to Judaism, that little kingdom. He takes that story and he uses it as the basis for his philosophical work known as the Kuzari, which basically is the king of the Khazars has a dream that his way of life is wrong, and he decides to become a monotheist. He invites a Christian, a Muslim, and a philosopher to argue before him what's the right path. Doesn't even pay attention to the Jews. So the Jews are nobodies. He listens to the Christians, they talk about the Jews, that they came out of Judaism. Listens to the Muslim, they came out of Judaism. Philosopher, he thinks doesn't make any sense. So he says, wait a minute, everybody's talking about the Jews. Maybe I should invite a rabbi. And that's how the book starts. He invites the rabbi, who then convinces him that Judaism is the proper path. And finally, we meet Moses. There's two more things we're going to do. Moses Maimonides. Okay, so we said Maimonides, Moses ben Maimon, known as Maimonides, means son of Maimon, also known by an acronym Rambam, began his life in Spain. However, his family was one of the families that were persecuted by the Almoravids, and they leave Spain for refusing to convert to Islam. Some people believe the family may have actually converted to Islam and escaped as soon as they could to return to Judaism. He lives in the land. They moved to the land of Israel. They live in Morocco. They finally settles down in Egypt, where he becomes a rabbi, a physician, a philosopher. He is the leader of the Jewish world at this time. He is the scholar that everybody goes to. He is a doctor. He writes a number of important medical texts. He is a philosopher, one of the most important philosophical works known as More Nevuchim, the Guide for the Perplexed, in which he combines Aristotelian thought and traditional Judaism. He is, as I said, a great scholar, and he writes a book known as the Mishneh Torah, which is a 14-volume work, a Jewish code of law. And you can see here all of the areas that he focuses on. And it's an interesting code of law because it begins with a book known as the Book of Knowledge, and in which it's not his philosophical work, but he talks about how people should think about God. So it's not your typical code because he's bringing in metaphysics as well, but that's part of his text. That's how he thought. He was a great systematic thinker, organizer. So And he even goes as far to develop civil laws and laws about courts and the laws for the king, the future king of the Jewish world, and how they should live. Now, Jews have not had a king. Jews have not had authority, sovereign authority for 1,200 years. But he's already thinking in those terms. The day comes we're going to have a king, and this is the laws based on our earlier sacred texts. This is the code that I'm developing. Two more guys just to mention, two more texts. Bachya ibn Pakuda, again, what's going on in the internal Jewish world? Jews are starting to look inward. So even though you have these codes of law, the codes of law tell you how to behave. But again, Bachya ibn Pakuda is influenced by Sufi Islam, which is very much like a mindfulness approach to Islam. He focuses the same thing on for Jews. How should Jews feel? How should you think? What are the most important beliefs that we should have as when we're following these mitzvot? And so that's his text that he's writing. So Jews are also, while they're focused on codes of law and what exactly to do, they're also turning inward. And the term here is Musar literature. It's Musar. It's discipline. How do I discipline myself, and how do I think about my ethical responsibilities? And finally, we've got the Zohar. We won't go into detail here. Zohar is the core mystical text. According to tradition, it was written by a 2nd century rabbi, Shimon Bar Yochai. The reality is it was written in the 13th century in one of these mystical circles in Spain, and it becomes the rock, the foundation text of all subsequent mystical teachings. But there's a lot of mystical work that's developing at this time. As I said, in 16th century, this is the 13th century, 13th, 14th century in Spain, but 200 years later in Sfat, they're taking the ideas in the Zohar and developing them. So this is all powerful stuff that develops while the Jews are under Islamic rule, and how Jews are beholden to Islamic culture, and developing their own faith and Judaism at the same time. So that's very, very fast review of Talmudic and Islamic Judaism. Next week we're going to look at European, the Ashkenazim, and they're very not very different, but different emphases in the Judaism of their civilization. Okay, everybody have a good week. We've got just a few more weeks left of class, so and then we'll take a break for the summer. Yes.
Oh, I had like a life update to tell you in private, Rabbi.
Oh, okay, sure.
So I'll stay on. It's
Okay.
not serious, but
okay,
yeah.
Very good. All right. Well, everybody else, have a good evening.
Have a good evening, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
You're
Bye.
welcome.
Okay. I've loved the class and everything.
Mhm.
I have recently switched schedules
Okay.
from being off Sundays and Mondays
Mhm.
to working Sunday through Thursday,
Okay.
which I wanted to have Friday night and Saturday off.
Good.
So I'm saying when I have a dinner break, and assuming it works well, I will try to tune into class. Today I had a long dinner break, so I could stay through the entirety.
Okay.
But I can't say that's always the same. And I just wanted to say I'm sorry if that's
okay.
the
We
case.
all right. Well, we've got what, three or four more weeks, and again, as you know, I always record it, and so you can
Watch back.